Hello, I'm Cortne Lee Smith, your host and producer of the Midnight Hour. I serve as a grief and loss coach to support people to thrive through loss. And this episode right here, as a part of our relationship service station media ministry, it is to help you and minister you to a place where that in your midnight hour, you don't miss the turnaround. You don't miss the turnaround, because when you miss the turnaround, you get stuck in a dark place. So these series will help you to see the turnaround so you can reach joy in the morning. So thank you for joining us, and stay tuned to see this episode. Hello! I
Hi,
am so
Cortne.
glad you are here for another one of our midnight hours. We have Preston Zeller. He is getting ready to give us some some skills and some tools on how we can move through our midnight hour. Y'all are gonna be excited about this one. Y'all know y'all think it's only one way, one thing, one process to get to something, but we have a good God that shows us many paths according to our unique needs, everything that we need. So there are different processes and different ways, but the thing is, you got to do something. You got to do something. Unfortunately, we think, and we have this little trendy misnomer that we say time will heal. Time don't do nothing except keep on ticking. Time don't do nothing but keep on ticking. If we don't do something different with our time, we get this exact same results, and that's called insanity. So today, Preston Zeller is going to tell us how to keep from being insane and use our creativity within. I am so excited to hear his journey. So Preston, please share with us your midnight hour.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, Cortne, very much for having me on. My midnight hour came at a time in life when I was I was on the up and up in my career. I felt like I was kind of establishing myself in sort of corporate world, even though I don't never really quite identified with the corporate lifestyle. I felt I was at a good place, married, 3 kids. Life was kind of just going on as, kind of status quo. And so this was early 2019. I found myself coming back from a meeting at work one day, and I had a voicemail from my mom. And she basically said, call me back. There's something really important I have to tell you. And it was, a voicemail, texts, missed phone calls. Not something I normally get from her. And I just call her back, and I knew it was something bad. I had some ideas of what it might be, but she just said my brother had died. And that was the start of my midnight hour. And my midnight hour felt like a very long time. And I'm, kind of still reflecting on that and coming out of it. But, it's really interesting what you said, of course, about time heals all wounds. I went into really, after my sort of initial shock, I had to go into sort of this business mode for my family. My sister and his wife and my parents were kind of all in a place where it just made it, I could tell it was harder for them to try to work out the business side of it. And by the business side, I mean, especially for anyone who's gone through a sudden death where you don't have plans. What do you do with the body? What do you do for a memorial? There are no predetermined, last will type of, desires there for the person who's died. And so we had to kind of figure all of that out. And in the meantime, of course, I'm supporting my family. I'm at work. I took a week off, I think, maybe a little more, but that was kind of it. So I had to leave, my wife and kids, go down to, so I was in Washington State. I go down to Southern California, and I'm dealing with, of course, everything I can, and in this very kind of logical frame set. So I'm not even processing really any of this grief at this time. There's bits here and there, but I'm like you know, at this point in my life, I'm like pretty stoic about a lot of things. And, you know, I think like a lot of men too, we sort of hold in emotion, right? We don't, it's you know, kind of old school thought that it's this sign of weakness to have any emotion or show emotion. So that wasn't necessarily drilled into me specifically, but I just sort of became that way, having to be this rock for my family, all those types of things. So I came back from his, you know, dealing with the initial aftermath, go back to work, fly back down for this memorial service. And I delivered his eulogy. It was about a 25-minute eulogy. And, you know, it's that's weird in and of itself. You're kind of summarizing someone's life in a very short period of time. And then I went back to work, and it was just like, I thought I had gotten it all out, so to speak, through these initial things, the eulogy and having the memorial and being with family and doing some crying and doing some praying and doing all these kinds of things. And that was kind of like the start of the midnight hour. But what happened over the next 6 months is I started to realize, man, I am not really processing any of this the way I should be. You know, try to group here and there, talk to someone here and there, but I'm just really still holding on to this. And I start noticing that it's affecting my ability to be a good husband, be a good father, be a productive. I mean, I was like in a work environment where something that was important to me, you know, weeks prior, I no longer cared about. And I was in a pretty high role where it was like, in some ways I couldn't afford to not be on my A game, so to speak. At least that's what I thought. I wasn't afforded that. So all these things kind of going on at the same time. And meanwhile, I'm an abstract artist. So was doing a little bit of painting, still not really processing it though. So that's really my midnight hours, this sudden death of my brother. He was 4 years older than me. And figuring out, what does this mean for me? Am I willing to do the introspection to actually get to a good place, and recognizing that grief is not some, you know, hourglass that you just flip over and then once the sand runs out, you're good.
I love that
very
analogy.
different.
Yes, the flipping the sunglass over, and when the sands run out, everything's just not fixed and okay. And I really hate when I see people post that time heals everything. Time fixes everything. That has been, I think, the worst saying that anybody can use in life. You know, because like you said, you went through this phase, first of all, of just, you know, the male thing that society has placed on people, being a rock. And we all know what happens to a rock. It just falls to the bottom. You know, that means it never allows itself to release, to rise to the top of a situation. You're always on the bottom trying to hold everybody else up so they can stay emotionally balanced or financially balanced. So I love that you brought that perspective, because that is really who I speak to, you know, as a strategist. 80% of my actually clients are men, because they have that breakthrough issue of breaking the rock, talking to people, crying, because they believe, okay, I spent my 25 minutes giving a eulogy. I got to go back to work. I got to prioritize my job. But the only problem with that is they have created a gap. You know, I really believe there is a grief gap in our society, in the workplace. There's a grief gap in people's households, and we don't realize how much that gap has created division just in our community and our society. That gap, because we have prioritized not processing that introspect. And I love that's what you call it. It is the introspect, because grief is really not about the person that has passed. Grief is about the people that are still living, and how we make a decision to live with their memories, how we make a decision to live, you know, with what has happened, the circumstances and situations. So when we learn how to go inside and say, well, how do I live with this? You know, what is my new living way? And that's what you have to go in and define that. So I love those analogies you gave about the rock, the inside part, and that the midnight hour was not one day. And I
No,
think that's where
yeah.
the confusion is. A lot of people don't realize it's not the day that the person died. It's not at the burial. It's not at the memorial, because those are still stages that you're going through before you even get to reach the process. Those are just functions or ceremonies that we go through, as part of life. And a lot of people say, oh, well, I've done what I needed to do because I went to the funeral. I said my goodbyes. Okay. But now, have you processed the goodbye? Like you said,
Yeah.
have you really dealt with it? So now that you can step back into those other roles and really be fully yourself. And I love the fact that you were transparent. What mattered to you before your brother's death wasn't even a priority anymore. Because what I do know about death, change, it changes our perspective and recreates new priorities in our lives. So I want to make sure people heard those things that you gave us. And I noticed you said you're an abstract artist, because I know you're going to tell us about some joy in art.
Yeah,
so
of course.
Now, Preston, definitely tell us about this stage when you knew that you had were getting joy, when the light had come on, when you were moving your way out of darkness.
Yeah, so I mean, I kind of mentioned how I had been painting, but I was painting these bigger 4-foot, 5-foot pieces to really in a more dramatic way illustrate certain themes of kind of that aftermath, and they're all related to like family and kind of a marriage being flipped upside down by death and things like this. But I had an art show in Washington where I was sharing these paintings with people and, retelling basically how they retold my brother's death. And everyone is having these emotional reactions to it. And that was sort of the spark to create this project where, because I realized I'm like, okay, time's not doing anything at this point. I'm not doing nearly as much as I need to do. And some of the traditional means of like grief counseling and stuff like that they weren't desirable, or I didn't want to pursue them. They just didn't feel right for me. So I set out to paint every day for a year, these intuitive abstract paintings. And I kind of like publicly announced it as a way to keep accountability. And so, I wanted to do these paintings as a way to essentially have this like mental snapshot of my brain in a given day, and then be able to look back on that. And so, there were so many parts of that process and sharing the artwork over time where, more and more people kind of started following this. I actually had to take about a month and a half break after the first 30 days because I moved my family from Washington down to Texas, and I didn't have, just kind of all the stuff set up. It was, moving is moving. You kind of like really disrupts your life. But once we got resettled in, the rest of the 11 months went really smooth for the most part. And so, it was interesting in that lull. I had people messaging me saying, "Hey, what happened to your daily paintings? I'm following these. I want to see more." And it gave some validation there that sharing these paintings and sharing some of my thoughts going through the grief process was actually helping other people. That was really cathartic in and of itself, because you start to realize there's so many more people than just you out there going through this tough time. And I think that's just like anything that can be a struggle in life, whether it's addiction or depression or whatever it is, they all kind of come back to this mental health theme. And grief is in that wheelhouse 100%. And it's not just one emotion. It's not even a emotion. It's just such a series of different things that you experience that include a range of emotions. So knowing that there's other people out there going through death, grief from death, but other different types of grief, was greatly validating. So over the course of this year, I'm posting and sharing all these things. And I think one of the there's two really kind of crazy moments in there. So part of this whole painting for a year thing wasn't just to have 365 paintings, but it was to reassemble all of these physical paintings into a final image that felt like what it meant to move through grief. And I had to actually figure out where that was going to go. So these are all kind of 8x10 paintings. And so I eventually kind of figured this out on the computer, what it was going to look like by, it was kind of a reverse puzzle, dragging these things around. But so I ended up hanging it in my house, and this is all part of the documentary, which I'll get into, but we hung these all in my house. And this was a really crazy process. And it was really like, if you imagine what it's like inside your brain to sort through thoughts and memories, that's kind of what we were doing in a very physical sense. And that was part of what we wanted to capture on camera, because I'm having to unbox these 365 paintings and organize them so that they can be put into this like cohesive image in a way that really makes sense to me. So I'm like reflecting on this, and then we hung it. It's 10 feet by 20 feet. So it's pretty massive. And not only that, we ended up putting all these lights behind it. So there's 4,500 lights behind it. It just kind of grew and grew and grew into this like wild thing. But the point was to make something that not just I could enjoy. I didn't want to hang this thing in my house. That was never actually my intention. It was just hard to go put this anywhere publicly. So we hung it, and the first time we hung it, I was just like, wow, this is really cool. I mean, I was looking at it on a small screen. But once we lit up the light show and we started playing the first song, wow, that was just really, it brought everything to a point of, what we were working for, and going, okay, there's something really special here, that you have this painting of grief that looks one way in the daytime, but then it kind of inverts into this different experience where the lights dance to music. It seemed to capture well these different elements of grief. And I had to go, my wife was there with me through this whole project, and it wasn't necessarily, I would say, easy on her either, because I was in a certain mindset trying to process grief through these paintings. And we just had like a really, really special moment. And that was kind of like when I think there was a lot of, it felt like an aspect of grief I had closure on. And that's, can be like a dirty word in the grief world, but, still a lot of healing, I think, came through that moment. So that's what we're aiming to do. And I'll just say one more, due through the documentary, I'll say one more thing that, one of the last interactions I had with my brother, and he was 4 years older than me, right? So we just had a brotherly relationship, competitive, all this kind of stuff. And, and there was a bit of envy there for things I pursue that I think he wanted to be more, he wished he could be more artistic, but like overall, it wasn't the most like, he didn't call me up and like commend me for something or whatever. We didn't have that. It was more like, well, what are you doing? How much money are you making? Like, what are you doing in life? These kind of just funny things you do as siblings. But I was on a cruise with them actually. And there's some footage of this in the documentary, and we're sitting around. I think my mom or something said like, okay, let's go around the room and compliment the person on your right. Well, my brother happened to be sitting to the left of me. And I'm like, oh, what's going to come out? Is it just going to be some like really cynical, remark and then move on? And he said, I've always admired Preston's creative ability, and it's something I wish I had. And, that's really stuck with me. And so in a sense, I'm like, this would have never really happened without him being gone, but I'm so glad that I could kind of capture something that is about him in many ways and have it be really grand. I'm like, okay, he would, in his style, he would have loved the grandeur of this. So yeah, I found a lot of joy in that whole process.
I could tell you just even going back to tell that bit of the story in his grand style, and I think that's what brings us joy when we can identify that grand style of that person that we love. It's just that smile that came about from that clip, but
Yeah.
it was you were telling the journey and that sharing. People think it is really about the story is about for other people, but it's actually about yourself. It's about that release that you're not just talking to yourself and you're pressing it down. And people don't understand sharing is about that releasing, that relaxing, and owning your own emotions. Like you say, there are a plethora of emotions that you go through. So to express those emotions and that experience in an artistic, creative way for 365 days, that is definitely something that's a journey, taking people on a journey with you.
Yeah.
And that is, like you say, that behind the scenes to let people know your emotions, your experience. And when people don't feel alone, and I think a lot of times in this world, the reason that we don't take the journey is because we're so afraid of having to take it alone, having to take it alone. But if we really look around the track, on the grief track, there's always somebody taking a lap with us. You know, they might be a little bit further ahead on the process, or somebody's running right there with us, but everybody is going through something. And if we could get out of this world of being ashamed of being just human, ashamed of being human, or just being so politically correct all of the time, and not allowing ourselves to be the human component that God created us to be, we can have that unique experience, you know, that individual experience. And like you were saying, the cookie cutter things did not work for you. You needed something that fit into your creative mold to allow you to get out what you needed to get out. So you could, it's nothing wrong with saying closure, because we all got to have closure. Otherwise, we stay in one place if we never close the door to go to the next place, because we always continually go back and forth. Closure is what we all need. Closure is like when your wound heals up. So we got to have closure. And that, and the thing is, in the grief world, too many people don't get closure. And the thing is, the wound continuously to reopen. The wound continues to profusely bleed, and people are dying inside because they never get the closure. They're just constantly bleeding. They're just constantly hurting. So that means constantly they're in need of some type of medical attention, whether it's emotional, physical, financial. They're always in need of something because they have not created closure. And I mean, closure sometimes is just changing the response and reaction when something comes about again, because now you've got into a place you say, okay, I know this is what works for me. Presenting this grand style, personality characteristic of my brother from a place of love, from a place that he admired this creativity. So it gives you a sense of, hey, I recreated him, not just for me, but for the world to see. So I love the way that you expressed that joy. You talked about that joy. And now you promised us that you were going to share with us what you're doing on this joy about the documentary, and how we can see it, how we can be involved in it, and definitely how you are using this artwork to actually help other people too.
Yeah, absolutely. So like I was talking about with the documentary, you know, this was actually a goal from the very beginning, because I knew that going through a process like this, like, there's got to be some people interested in at least seeing, you know, what I did, even, you know, if it's helpful. So we have a documentary. It's called The Art of Grieving. It'll come out, I think, probably April or May of next year of 2022. But so I guess this year, by the time you're listening to it. But yeah, the documentary, it's a feature-length documentary. It has, of course, myself telling a more nuanced version of kind of the story I'm telling here. But then it really takes you on this journey of like, what was it like to actually assemble this big piece and put it together, and what was it like? You know, we do share some of the paintings, so about 280 of the paintings were filmed while I was doing them. Of course, I don't share all of them, but we use it as a sort of time telling device. So you see, you know, day 25, day 75, day 100, that kind of thing throughout it. We also bring in this clinical perspective with through the art therapy project. So Lindsay Lederman, who's their clinical director, has been in art therapy for I think 10 years and in therapy in general for longer. But really, like I'm sharing my own experience in this doc. Meanwhile, there's her perspective on just grief in general. And we do take a historical look. One of the questions I had in my mind was, okay, I'm doing this, I'm going through this artistic process, but that's not a novel idea in and of itself. What have other people done in history to deal with that grief?
Yes.
And so there's this kind of like, art history component, we've been calling it, more exciting than like a docent slideshow, but seeing like there's some really interesting stories in history of even some famous paintings that we don't know were born out of grief, and some writings as well. So that documentary will be coming out again in the springtime, and then in combination of that, I've sort of I'm doing this continuation of the very last painting in this 365 series, where I used my brother's ashes in a painting. And that was a very surreal experience in and of itself. But as I started talking to people more, I realized that using ashes in abstract artwork is could be very healing. And so that's what I've started to do for other people now, is these commissioned paintings using the ashes of a loved one to commemorate their memory, and do it in a way that is uses ashes in a way that's a little bit, I guess, outside the box in a literal way, but it's actually taking it and reforming it into something. And the whole part of the ethos there is that grief is going to change as you grow older, and as you have a different perspective on your grief. And that's really what a painting is meant to do, and what abstract painting particularly is good at. It's not this like stagnant portrait of the person that's held in time at a certain age. I go through this process. Well, I will really do this exploration of who that person was and your relationship with them, and how that's all being reflected in the painting, and the colors and techniques being used. It's all transformed into something that you could proudly hang in your house, and just be a different element of your healing journey, as opposed to being, again, limited to just the things that we know are out there. And I mean, I'll just say this too, that I think one of the overall goals is to help relieve suffering. And I think that's what all of us in this journey are going on, is how do we bring some more light into a world that doesn't celebrate grieving and doesn't celebrate, the emotional side of it, as much as I think in cultures past it was a part of that. So, if I can do that through the documentary, do that through doing these grief paintings for people, then that's great. And that's the mission I'm on. So
I love it, Preston. And I love you said celebrate the grief. We always think about grief as something that we should suppress. We think of grief as a bad word. I'm glad you said that, because I believe grief is good. Grief is good because grief lets us take an introspective ourselves. It stretches us, it grows us, it pushes to next level, and it reprioritizes our life in that particular situation and circumstances. So I've enjoyed this conversation with you, Preston, but I look forward to connecting with you on your documentary. So I'm looking forward to when it come out. I would love to see the artwork face to face, in person, because it sounds really phenomenal to look at that journey and how it's been put together. And I definitely will connect you, but love you to put you as a resource in our grief garage, so people can connect with you and get their ashes outside of the box. I love that, outside of the box, because I think grief is outside of the box. Like you said, the cookie cutter version, going through stages. Everybody needs their own unique strategy and journey. So I am in agreement with you. So I want to offer that to other people, to find you as a resource. So when they're Googling grief, they don't have to go to 100 million pages. They can go to the Grief Garage and find all those resources right there in the garage as tools. Click on your link, find you. get access to you, because I believe there are people who really, if you see it in that way, like you see it, it's abstract. So the perspective changes and it grows as you mature along the journey and you see it in a different way. So that is a beautiful analogy. So I thank you, Preston, for joining us and sharing your story with us from your journey from midnight hour to joy. So I look forward to connecting with you outside of the stream world, and all of our listeners in today. Y'all jump in the Grief Garage, get your link, get your memorial artwork. Even if it happened a long time ago, get your ashes outside of the box, outside of containers, and see it in a different way. You don't have to give him all of them, but do it in a different way so you can express that journey in a different way. So I look forward to seeing you all on the next episode of the Midnight Hour.
Thanks, Cortne.